Alright, so I'm going to do that second example that I didn't get to do in lecture on a while loop. So this example, the point of the code is to read in a character string array and remove all of the double H's that occurred. So an example of this is maybe you were collecting data in the lab and a string was spit out to a file to keep track of some data that you were collecting. And there was an error, and every once in a while, instead of putting a single H, a double H was recorded. So you want to just filter out all those double H's that you got from that data collection. Sorry, it's very loud here. So here's an example of a character string array that has some character strings in it. Here I'm going to use a regular array, not a cell array. So just a reminder, I showed this in lecture. But when you put in a regular array like this, it just strings all of the words together so they don't get separated. So I'm just doing this to avoid the syntax associated with the cell array, so I can just show you the algorithm logic to remove the double H's. So I'm going to go through and follow the procedure laid out in your pre-labs, where you're going to start with step 0, which is read the problem, and then step 1 is to write out a pseudocode that solves the problem human style. So we're going to think through the logic. So the first step you would need to complete this algorithm is that you are going to need data. So you're going to need to have some data to get started here. So in this case, you would need to have some text string. Second thing is we want to have a check to only look at elements of the array that are H's, because if there's any other doubles in the array, that's okay. So we're going to just start by looking at the first element of the array, and we are going to check if that first element is an H. And so that's one check that we're going to have to make. If that's true, then we are going to want to then check if there's a double. So remember, we only want to remove double H's, not any other doubles. So we first need to make sure that it's an H, and then if it is an H, we want to check if there's a double H. So the second check you'll want to think about doing is check to see if that first element and that second element are equal. So that would be the second check we would want to do. And then if that is true, then we want to remove one of the H's to correct the problem. Okay, so that's like the general logic. And then, I don't know if this is going to let me delete this here. So if all of those conditions are true, then you remove the H. And then we're going to want to repeat steps 2 through 4 for all adjacent elements until you reach the end of the array. Okay, so that kind of completes the whole logic. You first need to have some data that you're starting with. You have a couple checks that you're going to do, and those checks depend on each other. So first we want to check if it's an H, then we want to check if it's a double H. If those both are true, then we want to remove one of the H's, and then we're going to want to repeat all of those steps. So this is my human steps of solving this problem. So this is me just thinking through how I would do it. So I would go and I would go T. Okay, that's not an H. I'm okay. Then I would go to the next one. Second element is an H. Okay, so that is an H. So then I'm going to go and check, is the next one an H2? Yes, so these two are both H's, so I need to remove one of them. Then I'm going to move forward. Now I'm at the E, that's not an H. Now I'm at the T, that's not an H. Okay, this is an H, so I'm going to check that. But then I look at the next check, it's not a double H, so then I move on to the next one. So that's kind of how I came up with this logic. And then what I'm going to do is convert all of these to computer steps. That's step 2 of your algorithmic procedure. So this is going to be a variable definition. I'm doing this all in MATLAB just so that I don't have to switch screens around on my computer, but you can write all this out. Okay, so the first check, whether or not the first one is an H, is going to require a relational operator or statement and an if statement. That's how I'm going to do that on the computer. And this will be the same thing. The second check will also just involve a relational operator and an if statement. The removal is something I did show in lab, or in lecture. If you want to remove an element of an array, you can just set an element equal to these open and closed square brackets. So here I have my text string, so I can show you how that works before we use it. So if I just put the first element equal to an open and closed square bracket, you can see it just took that element out here. There was a T there and I just removed it. So that's how that works for removing an element. And that is something pretty unique to MATLAB. That's not typical in most programming languages to be able to remove an element like that. And then we're going to just do a repeat statement. So we're going to repeat this some number of times. And if we knew exactly how many number of times we would do it, then we would have a for loop. But the unique part of this algorithm is that this entire array is going to be changing sizes because we're removing elements from it. So this is a case where a for loop wouldn't work, because if you had it do it for the original size of the text string, or the text array, then you would have some errors, because you would go out of bounds of the array because it would keep decreasing size. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a while loop instead for that changing side. So now I'm going to kind of write out a pseudocode before I do my final code. So step 1 is to define that text array. So I can just go up here and copy the one that I already typed out. And I'm going to comment this pseudocode out, so I'm going to just do a little rough sketch of the pseudocode. The way I like to start a pseudocode after I've written out all those steps is to just start with my wrappers. So I know that I'm going to have a while loop, and then inside my while loop I'm going to have an if statement. So I'm going to kind of think through some of that before I get started too much. So I know I'm going to have one if statement with a wrapper. And then because I knew from my steps here that I have to check if one's true, and if that's true, then check if another one is true, I know that those are going to be nested inside of each other. So I only want the double check to happen if the letter is already an H. So that's a nested if statement that I'm going to want to do there. So the conditions on the while and the if statements are I still got to kind of think about that. But one thing that I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier is I know I'm going to be checking letters, adjacent letters. So I'm going to define two variables, letter 1 and letter 2, that will call out the two neighboring letters. So I'm going to use the index k here to start thinking about it. So I'm going to pull out the first one and then pull out the second one too. And so that's kind of my the kind of pseudocode that I've written. Is I'm just kind of putting everything in the proper order, and then I need to start thinking about my conditions. So let's start with the if statement conditions, because I think those are the easiest. So we know we're going to have some sort of counter that we're going to need to keep track of our elements. So if we're going to start with element 1 in this loop, then I'm going to initialize k as 1, and then at the bottom of the loop I'm going to advance k by replacing the value with the next value. So if k starts out as 1, it's going to execute all these commands. It's going to advance to the next one, which will be 2, and k will now be 2. And this is a typical counter algorithm that just continues to advance the counter. It looks like I'm probably just going to write the code and not write the pseudocode, so this is something you kind of work out before you come to lab and start typing it out. But here I'm just going to go ahead and finish and write it in proper syntax. So let's think about the first if statement. So the first if statement is this step 2, check if the text is an H, the first element of the text. So if I were going to do the first element of the text, I would say check if the first element of this text string is equal to an H. And so the double equals is a relational statement. And if that's true, oops, sorry, I put it in the wrong one. I wanted to put that in the first one. If that's true, then you also want to check to see if the first element is equal to the one next to it. So that's what these two statements say. Check if text 1 is the same as an H, and check to see if the two adjacent are equal to each other. So what I've done is I've created new variables to just help me think about this a little better that are going to be changing as the loop's changing. So instead of having a 1 here, I'm actually going to index it with k. So every time the loop runs, that will be the next value. And then I'm also just going to go ahead and use the variable letter 1 just to make it easier for me to understand. This is totally optional. You could just put text of k and text of k plus 1 directly into here. But a lot of people like to kind of see it this way. It makes more sense to a lot of people. So here's my first statement, here's my second statement. And then if those two conditions are true, if I go back to my steps, have this condition and this condition, then we're going to remove an element. Now we can choose to remove the element k or k plus 1, but I'm going to go ahead and remove k because then it will still check k plus 1 on the next one in case it's a duplicate with the 1 behind it. So that's steps 2 through 4 right here. So now we need to think about how to repeat this for a lot of k's. So we want to keep running this until you've reached the end of the text string, which is changing. So we are just going to create another variable that calculates the total length of text after things are removed. And we are just going to continue to run this loop until as long as k is less than stop. Once k is equal to stop or greater than stop, then this loop is no longer going to run. And so that is repeat 2 to 4 for all adjacent elements until you reach the end of the array. So the only trick here is if you used a for loop and the for loop was like this, for k equals 1 to length of text. If you did it this way, this would be calculated based off of the length of this array, and it isn't updated as the loop runs. This is updated. This is only found by the computer one time, and it doesn't change while the loop changes. So it would run for the length of this array, and as the array gets smaller, it would get to the end, and it would try to access elements that were no longer there. So this is not going to work. So instead, the while loop checks the condition every time the loop executes, and so it's going to recheck the length of text and update the loop condition. And so this is an example of why you would want to use a while loop instead of a for loop. So let's see if our code works. So I'm going to run this end file here, and I'm just going to make sure everything's cleared out because I was running some stuff in here. Okay, so I just got this error on line 31, undefined function or variable stop. So the first time this while loop runs, it's looking for a value for a stop, and it doesn't have one yet because it's only defined inside the loop. So in order to get this loop going, we need to set stop to something that will get the loop going. So if k is initialized to 1, then stop needs to be initialized to something bigger than 1 so that this is a true statement. You could also just initialize it to the length of text. It doesn't really matter. So let's try that. So here is the new text string. The only thing that prints from this code that I wrote is the final text string after all of this logic happens. And you can see that it removed all of the H's, the double H's. And you could change this initial text string to be anything, and it would automatically remove the H's. So here I added tree and hot, and it removed the double H of hot. So I hope this helped give you an example of a logic with a while loop. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and good luck with writing your root finder while loop. It's actually a little bit simpler than this one, but the idea is that you're going to write a condition here that's going to change or update as the loop executes. And that's it. Thanks.